Dawn in the Indigo Fields, 2,500 words. The darkness before dawn has a particular quality in the Carolina Low Country. It's thick, almost tangible, heavy with moisture that clings to your skin like a second layer of clothing. You wake not because you want to, but because your body has learned the rhythm that sleep is a precious, finite thing, measured not in hours of rest, but in the brief escape from consciousness. The roosters haven't yet begun their calling, but something deeper pulls you from dreams you can barely remember. Perhaps it's the stirring of others in the quarters around you, the soft shuffling of feet on dirt floors, the whisper of fabric as someone rises in the darkness. You lie there for just a moment, feeling the thin mattress beneath youth panish moss and corn husks wrapped in rough cloth, barely softening the wooden platform that serves as your bed. The air inside the cabin is close, warm, even in these early hours, carrying the mingled scents of bodies, wood smoke from yesterday's cooking fire, and something green and growing that seems to seep through every crack in the walls. That's the indigo. Even here, in what little space is yours, you can smell it. The plant has a distinctive odor when it's growing earthy, slightly bitter, promising the violent transformation it will undergo when harvest comes. Your muscles ache before you even move. This is nothing new. You've grown so accustomed to the persistent soreness in your back, your shoulders, your hands, that you sometimes wonder what it would feel like to wake without pain, to stretch and feel only the pleasant pull of a body well rested, rather than this deep, bone-tired heaviness that never quite leaves. You're young still, perhaps 23, 24 years old, though you're not entirely certain. Birthdays aren't celebrated here, and the years blend together in an endless cycle of planting and growing and harvesting. But your body feels older. Your hands, when you flex them in the darkness, are already rough and calloused, the nails broken and stained. Outside, the world is beginning its transformation from night to day. You can hear it if you listen closely, the gradual shift in the quality of silence. The insects that sang through the night are quieting somewhere in the distance, toward the main house that you can't see from here, but whose presence shapes every aspect of your existence. A dog barks once, twice, then settles. The air itself seems to hold its breath, waiting for the sun that will soon turn this tolerable darkness into something far more oppressive. You rise, moving carefully in the darkness. There are others here. This small cabin houses 6 of you, men and women both, though families with children have their own quarters if they're lucky. The concept of privacy is almost laughable. You dress in the same clothes you wore yesterday, will wear tomorrow, will wear until they fall apart and are replaced with another rough cotton garment dyed the same indeterminate brownish color. The cloth is coarse against your skin, and there's a patch at the shoulder where you mended a tear using thread you carefully saved from an old shirt, unraveling it strand by strand to save what could be saved. There's no mirror here, nothing to tell you what you look like, though you can see yourself reflected sometimes in the still water of the irrigation ditches. A face that could be any age, dark skin that's somehow both rich and tired looking, eyes that carry something you don't have words for, not quite sadness, not quite resignation, but something in between, something that comes from knowing with absolute certainty what your day will hold before you've even stepped outside. The low country of South Carolina is a peculiar place, a landscape where water and land engage in a constant negotiation. This is 1748, perhaps, or 1750, to somewhere in the middle of the 18th century. In a time when this colony has discovered its fortune in a plant that produces the most extraordinary blue, indigo. The very word carries weight, carries value. In London, in Paris, in the great cities of Europe where you will never go, people pay extraordinary prices for fabric dyed with the pigment you help create. Blue has always been an expensive color, the blue of nobility, of wealth, of virgins' robes in religious paintings. And now, here, in this hot, humid corner of the British colonies, enslaved workers, like you, are producing it by the barrel. You step outside, and the air hits you like something alive. Even now, before the sun has properly risen, the humidity is remarkable. It's not the dry heat of Africa that some of the older people remember and speak of in quiet moments. This is something wetter, thicker, more clinging. The mosquitoes are already active, their high-pitched, whining a constant companion. You've learned to mostly ignore their bites, though sometimes, when you're trying to sleep, the itching becomes almost unbearable. Malaria is common here. You've seen people shake with fever, seen the way the sickness can take someone strong and reduce them to a trembling shadow. You've been lucky so far. Or perhaps your body has simply learned to endure what it must. The sky is beginning to lighten now, just barely. Not true light yet, but that gradual lessening of absolute darkness. You can make out shapes the other cabins in your row. The large oak tree whose spreading branches provide the only shade you'll find during the brief midday break. The path that leads toward the fields. Everything is familiar. You could walk this path in complete darkness, could find your way to your assigned section of the indigo fields with your eyes closed. Sometimes you wonder if this knowledge is a blessing or a curse, to be so intimately familiar with the geography of your own captivity. Other workers are emerging now, silent shapes in the pre-dawn. There's a kind of choreography to these early moments, everyone moving through their routines with practiced efficiency. Someone has already started a small fire, and there's water heating in a battered pot not for washing, but for the thin corn mush that will serve as breakfast. Your stomach is never quite full anymore. You remember being truly satisfied, the comfortable fullness of a good meal, but that was long ago, in a different life. Now there's only the constant low-level hunger, the way your body has learned to function on less than it needs. You think sometimes about the woman who made all this possible, though you've never seen her yourself. Eliza Lucas Pinckney. Her name is spoken in different tones, depending on who's speaking. The white planters speak of her with admiration. This young woman who successfully cultivated indigo in Carolina soil, who corresponded with experts and ran her father's plantation and became something of a legend. She's held up as an example of colonial ingenuity, of American entrepreneurial spirit. But you know a different truth. The knowledge of how to grow indigo, how to process it, how to time the harvest, and manage the fermentation. That knowledge came from Africa, came from people who were stolen from regions where indigo had been cultivated for generations, where the techniques had been perfected over centuries. Miss Eliza may have experimented and organized, may have managed the business of it all, but the actual knowledge, the actual backbreaking labor, that came from people like you. The foreman will arrive soon. He's a white man, weathered by years under this unforgiving sun, with eyes that miss nothing and a temper that flares unpredictably. He carries a whip, though he doesn't use it. The threat of it is usually enough. You've learned to read his moods in the set of his shoulders, the tone of his voice. You've learned to make yourself unremarkable, to work steadily without drawing attention, to be neither the fastest nor the slowest, neither the most skilled nor the most clumsy. Invisibility is a kind of survival strategy. As the light grows stronger, you can see the fields themselves beginning to emerge from the darkness. The indigo plants are perhaps 3 feet tall now. Their leaves a vibrant green that will later, through a process that still seems almost magical despite your understanding of it, become that precious blue. They grow in neat rows that stretch toward the horizon, each plant demanding constant attention, weeding, monitoring for pests, watching for signs of disease or weakness. The fields are both beautiful and oppressive, a sea of green that represents wealth for people who will never bend their own backs to harvest it. You know what today will bring because it brings the same thing every day. The sun will rise, and with it will come heat that feels almost solid. You will work until your body screams for rest, and then you will work more. You will feel the burn in your muscles, the ache in your back, the way your hands cramp around the tools you use. You will measure the day not in hours, but in the slow movement of shadows, in the height of the sun, in the gradually increasing desperation for the brief break at midday. And tomorrow you will wake again in the darkness and do it all over. But here's what they don't see, can't see, won't see. You will also find moments of unexpected beauty. The way dew catches on a spider's web, the call of a bird you don't have a name for, the brief coolness when a cloud passes over the sun. You will exchange a glance with another worker that communicates volumes without words. You will survive another day, and that survival, in its own way, is an act of defiance. The darkness is almost gone now. The roosters have begun their calling, a ragged chorus that announces the official start of the day. You take a breath, filling your lungs with this heavy, humid air that tastes of salt from the nearby ocean and earth from the fields and something indefinably green. Your body knows what's coming. Your mind knows what's coming. But you're still here, still breathing, still yourself, despite everything designed to strip that self away. The day begins. The indigo plant and its demands *. There's a particular intimacy that comes from working with a plant every single day, from knowing it in ways that go beyond names or scientific classification. You know indigo the way you know your own body, through touch, through scent, through the accumulated experience of countless hours spent in its presence. If someone asked you to describe it, you might struggle to find the right words, but your hands would know. Your hands always know. The plant itself is deceptively modest in appearance. Indigofera tinctoria, though you've never heard it called by that Latin name, stands about 3 feet tall when fully grown. Its leaves are small and delicate, arranged in neat pairs along slender stems. In summer, it produces tiny flowers, pink, lavender, sometimes almost white, that would be pretty if you had the luxury of noticing such things. But you don't grow indigo for its flowers. You grow it for what's hidden inside those leaves, a chemical compound called indican that, through a process of fermentation and oxidation, transforms into indigo dye. That deep, rich, extraordinary blue that wealthy people across the ocean are willing to pay astonishing amounts to possess. The low country of South Carolina turns out to be nearly perfect for indigo cultivation, though perfect is a word that tastes bitter in your mouth. The plant likes heat, thrives in the long, humid summers. It tolerates the sandy soil reasonably well, though it does better with some clay mixed in. Most importantly, it can handle the intense sun that beats down on these coastal fields with relentless intensity. The same conditions that make this work nearly unbearable for you are exactly what the indigo plant needs to flourish. The growing season begins in spring, after the last danger of frost has passed. The seeds are tiny, smaller than grains of rice, dark and hard. You've helped with planting, walking the rows, and dropping seeds at precise intervals, covering them with soil, hoping they'll germinate. It's one of the few parts of the process that carries any sense of hope. These small seeds holding the possibility of something new. Though of course that possibility isn't yours. The profit from these plants, the wealth they'll generate, will flow to the plantation owner, will buy him more land, more enslaved people, more of everything he wants. But still, there's something about putting seeds in earth that touches something old in your memory, something from before. Once the plants emerge, small green shoots, pushing through the soil, the real work begins. Indigo requires constant attention. The rows must be kept meticulously clean, free of weeds that would compete for nutrients and water. This means hours upon hours of hoeing, of bending and straightening, moving down the endless rows with your hoe in hand. The motion becomes automatic, your body finding a rhythm that allows you to keep working even as your mind drifts elsewhere. The hoe itself is a simple Tula wooden handle, worn smooth by countless hands before yours, attached to a metal blade that you keep reasonably sharp by rubbing it against a stone during the brief breaks you're allowed. Weeding is monotonous work, but it requires attention. You have to distinguish between the weeds and the young indigo plants, especially early in the season when everything is small and green and similar. Pull the wrong plant and you'll face consequences: wasted space in the field, reduced yield, the foreman's anger. So you learn to recognize indigo by the shape of its leaves, by the particular way it grows. You learn to spot the weeds by their faster growth, their broader leaves, their tendency to sprawl rather than grow upright. Your eyes develop a kind of pattern recognition that operates almost unconsciously. The plants also need to be thinned. When too many seeds germinate in one spot, competing for the same resources, you must remove some to give the others room to thrive. It feels wasteful somehow, pulling up perfectly good plants, letting them die so that others might grow stronger. But this is the logic of cultivation, the mathematics of maximizing yield. Everything here is calculated for efficiency, for profit. Even the spacing between plants has been determined through experimentation close enough to make full use of the land, far enough apart that each plant gets adequate sun and soil. Water is another constant concern. Indigo needs moisture, but not too much. The low country's rainfall is usually adequate, but in dry spells, the plants must be irrigated. This means hauling water from the nearest creek or pond, carrying buckets or barrels, pouring carefully at the base of each plant. It's exhausting work, especially in summer heat. The weight of the water makes your shoulders ache. And there's something particularly cruel about being surrounded by the moisture of humidity, while simultaneously working desperately to provide water to plants. The air is wet, your clothes are soaked with sweat, but the ground is dry and cracked, and the plants are wilting, and so you carry water. Then there are the pests. Indigo attracts various insects, caterpillars that chew the leaves, aphids that cluster on the stems, beetles that seem to appear from nowhere. You learn to watch for the signs: holes in leaves, yellowing stems, the plant's overall appearance of stress. Sometimes you pick the insects off by hand, crushing them between your fingers. Sometimes the foreman approves the use of whatever crude pest. Controlled methods are available, dusting the plants with ash or lime, though these materials can burn your hands and make your eyes water. The constant battle against insects is just one more task in the endless list of tasks. As the plants grow taller, they sometimes need support, especially if storms come through. A broken plant is a lost plant. So, after heavy winds, you walk the fields looking for damage, staking up plants that have bent, removing those that are beyond saving. You learn to read the sky, to sense when weather is coming. The air feels different before a storm, heavier somehow, charged with something you can't quite name. The birds behave differently, flying low and calling with particular urgency. These are the kinds of knowledge that come from spending every day outdoors, from being forced to pay attention to nature's patterns because your survival depends on it. Throughout all of this, you're aware of the watching. The foreman makes regular rounds, inspecting the work, looking for any excuse to criticize or punish. But there's also the self-policing that happens among the workers themselves. Everyone knows that if one person's section shows neglect, everyone might face consequences. So there's pressure from all sides to work faster, to be more thorough, to never give anyone reason to notice you for the wrong reasons. You think sometimes about the woman who gets credit for all of this, Eliza Lucas Pinckney. The story that's told in The Big House is one of determination and intelligence, how she conducted experiments, testing different soils and cultivation methods, corresponding with experts in the Caribbean who were already growing indigo successfully, how she persevered despite initial failures, how her success helped establish indigo as Carolina's most profitable export crop, alongside rice. The story makes her sound like a pioneer, an innovator, someone worthy of admiration. But you know what that story leaves out? The knowledge of indigo cultivation came from West Africa, from regions where the plant had been grown for centuries, where communities had developed sophisticated understanding of every aspect of its care and processing. When enslaved people were brought here, they brought that knowledge with them, carried it in their heads and hands, even as everything else was stripped away. Miss Eliza may have organized the experiments, may have kept the records and managed the correspondence. But who do you think actually planted those experimental crops? Who tended them, harvested them, processed them? Who held the real knowledge of how to read a plant's needs, when to harvest for optimal dye content, how to manage the fermentation process that would come later? The injustice of it sits heavy in your chest. To have your knowledge used, your expertise exploited, while someone else receives credit and profits theft of a particularly insidious kind. But this is how everything works here. Your labor is stolen. The products of your labor are stolen. Even the knowledge in your head, passed down from your ancestors, is stolen and repackaged as someone else's innovation. The plants are approaching harvest size now. You can tell by their height, by the fullness of their leaves, by some quality that's hard to articulate. The leaves have reached their peak concentration of indicanates, the moment when they must be cut. Too early and the yield will be poor. Too late and the quality degrades. Timing is everything, and despite what the plantation records might suggest, it's not Miss Eliza or the foreman who determines the right moment. It's people like you, people whose names appear only in property inventories, whose expertise is invisible in the historical record, but absolutely essential to the entire enterprise. Soon the harvest will begin. Soon these fields that you've tended so carefully, that have demanded so much of your body and time, will be cut down. The plants that have structured your days for months will be transformed from living green things into raw material for the fermentation vats. And that process, that's where things become truly difficult. That's where the real dangers lie. That's where the beautiful blue is born from something that smells like death and feels like poison. But for now, in this moment, the plants are still standing, still growing, still drawing water and sun and transforming them into leaves that hold a secret, the promise of blue. You straighten from your work, feeling your back protest, feeling the sun burning the back of your neck despite the cloth you've tied there for protection. You wipe sweat from your face with the back of your hand, and you continue down the row, hoeing the weeds, tending the plants, doing the work that makes other people wealthy while you remain property, remain poor, remain trapped in this cycle of cultivation and harvest that never ends. The indigo demands everything, and you give it, not because you want to, but because you have no choice. This is the mathematics of enslavement, your labor extracted day after day, year after year, transformed into profit that flows away from you like water running downhill, following the path of least resistance toward those who are already standing on higher ground. Asterisk, the harvest. Cutting and carrying asterisk, harvest day arrives with a particular quality of inevitability. You've seen it coming for weeks, the plants reaching their peak, the foreman walking the fields more frequently, making calculations in his head or scratching notes in the small leather-bound book he carries. There's a feeling of culmination in the air. All those months of tending and weeding and watching about to be transformed into action. But unlike harvest celebrations you've heard about in other contexts, other crops, there's no joy here. Only the knowledge that the hardest work is just beginning. The day starts earlier than usual, if such a thing is possible. You're roused while the stars are still visible. The darkness complete except for a few lanterns being lit around the quarters. There's no time for the usual slow awakening, the gradual transition from sleep to consciousness. Today requires urgency. The plants must be cut while they're fresh, before the sun has been beating on them for hours. Timing matters enormously. In indigo production, every stage has its critical window, and harvesting is no exception. You grab your cutting knife, a tool you've been issued specifically for this work. It's not particularly sharp tools are dangerous, and enslaved people aren't trusted with weapons that could be turned against their captors. But it's sharp enough to cut through indigo stems if you apply sufficient force. The blade is about 6 inches long, slightly curved, with a wooden handle that's been worn smooth by countless hands before yours. You've learned to grip it in a way that minimizes blisters. Though your hands will still be raw by the end of the day, the fields in early morning have an almost ethereal quality. Mist rises from the damp ground, making everything look soft and dreamlike. The indigo plants are heavy with dew, their leaves glinting in the first light. It would be beautiful if you had any energy left for noticing beauty, if you weren't already bracing yourself for what the day will demand of your body. But there's something about this moment, this brief pause before the work begins in earnest, that you can't help but register somewhere deep in your consciousness. The world feels hushed, expectant, balanced on the edge of transformation. Then the foreman's voice cuts through the quiet, and the harvest begins. You move to your assigned section of the field. The plants here are yours in the sense that you tended them, weeded around them, watched them grow from tiny shoots to these full, leafy specimens. But they're not yours in any way that matters. Still, there's some small piece of you that takes note of how well they've grown, how healthy they look. Pride is a complicated emotion when the fruits of your labor belong entirely to someone else. But it exists nonetheless, stubborn and irrational. The cutting itself requires a particular technique. You grasp a plant near its base with your left hand, then bring the knife down sharply with your right, severing the stem about 2 inches above the ground. The plant comes away in your hand, surprisingly heavy with the weight of all those leaves. You lay it on the ground parallel to the row, already thinking about the next plant. The motion becomes rhythmic, quickly grasp, cut, lay down, move on. Grasp, cut, lay down, move on. Your body finds its cadence, that familiar state where conscious thought recedes and muscle memory takes over. But even with muscle memory, even with rhythm, the work is punishing. You're bent over constantly, your back forming a curve that will make itself known later in sharp pains and dull aches. The sun rises quickly, burning off the mist, and with it comes the heat. Within an hour, you're soaked with sweat, the cloth of your shirt sticking to your back. The humidity is extraordinary, the air so thick with moisture that breathing feels like drinking. Insects swarm around you, mosquitoes, flies, knots attracted by your sweat and the sap bleeding from cut plant stems. Your hands begin to hurt. The knife handle rubs against the same spots over and over, creating friction that first produces warmth, then rawness, then blisters. The plant stems are rough and sometimes sharp, leaving small cuts on your fingers and palms. Sap from the plants gets on your skin, sticky and irritating. By midday, your hands will be a mess of minor injuries, each one small and insignificant on its own, but collectively creating a constant, nagging discomfort that you'll carry with you for days after the harvest ends. The rows are long, impossibly long. You start at one end and cut your way toward the other, moving steadily but never fast enough to satisfy the foreman, who walks the field shouting encouragement that sounds more like threats. Keep moving, no slacking. We need these plants cut before the sun gets too high. His voice is hoarse from shouting, but he never seems to tire. You wonder sometimes what it would be like to have his job to walk and watch and yell while others do the actual work. But then you remember that his position depends on his cruelty, on his willingness to use violence against people who look like you. and you decide you wouldn't trade places, even if such a thing were possible. Other workers are moving down adjacent rows, and you can hear them even when you can't see them. The rhythmic cutting, the occasional grunt of effort, the rustle of plants being laid on the ground. There's comfort in knowing you're not alone in this, that others are experiencing the same exhaustion, the same pain. Sometimes, when the foreman is far enough away, someone will start singing work songs that serve multiple purposes, keeping rhythm, passing time, maintaining some small piece of cultural identity that survives despite everything designed to erase it. The songs are often coded, carrying meanings that go deeper than the simple words suggest. Songs about freedom, about endurance, about rivers that might lead to somewhere better. You join in when you can spare the breath, your voice blending with others in harmonies that speak to something beyond this field, beyond this moment. Once a section is cut, the next phase begins. The plants lying on the ground must be gathered into bundles and carried to the processing area. This is where the work becomes truly. You drop your cutting knife and pick up lengths of rough cord, working quickly because the cut plants must be processed soon, must not be allowed to dry out too much. You gather armfuls of indigo, wrap the cord around them, pull tight, tie off. Each bundle weighs perhaps 25 or 30 pounds, an awkward, bulky load. Then comes the carrying. You hoist a bundle onto your shoulder, feeling its weight settle against your bones. The leaves are scratchy against your neck. The stems poke through your shirt. You start walking toward the vats, following a path that's been worn into the earth by countless trips back and forth. The distance is perhaps 200 yards, but it feels much longer. With each step, the bundle seems to get heavier. Your shoulder begins to ache where the weight presses down. You shift the bundle to your other shoulder, giving the first one a brief respite, but that only means the second shoulder will start hurting sooner. The path is uneven, rutted from cartwheels and foot traffic. You have to watch where you're stepping or risk turning an ankle. The sun beats down with crushing intensity. The air shimmers with heat. Sweat runs into your eyes, stinging and blurring your vision. Your breath comes hard and fast. The vats seem impossibly far away, receding like something in a dream where you walk and walk but never arrive. But you do arrive, eventually. You drop your bundle in the designated area near the first vat, where others are already accumulating. For just a moment, you stand there, hands on your knees, pulling air into your burning lungs. Your shoulder throbs where the bundle was resting. You can feel your heart pounding in your chest. You want desperately to rest, to drink water, to sit in the shade. But there's no time. The foreman is already yelling for people to get back to the fields. There are more bundles to carry, many more. So you turn around and walk back, your legs heavy, your feet dragging slightly. The return trip is faster because you're not carrying anything, but it's not easier. You're already exhausted, already hurting, and you know you'll have to pick up another bundle and make this trip again, and again, and again. You lose count of how many times you walk this path. The day becomes a blur of cutting and bundling and carrying, the individual trips merging into one long, continuous strain of effort. Other workers are on the same path, creating a kind of procession. Those carrying bundles move more slowly, bent under their loads. Those returning walk faster, their steps lighter, but their faces showing the fatigue that comes from knowing they'll soon be carrying weight again. You pass each other without speaking. There's no breath to spare for conversation. But sometimes your eyes meet, and in those brief glances there's an entire conversation. We're suffering together. We're enduring. We'll survive this day like we've survived all the others. The sun reaches its peak, a white-hot disk that seems to take up half the sky. The heat is no longer just uncomfortably, it's dangerous. You've seen people collapse from it, seen them carried to the shade, seen them struggle to revive. You've learned to recognize the signs in yourself, the dizziness, the nausea, the way your vision starts to tunnel. When you feel these things, you try to slow down just slightly. Try to take deeper breaths. Try to will your body to keep functioning, but you can't slow down too much. The foreman is always watching. There are consequences for appearing weak, for failing to meet the expected pace. Midday brings a brief break, not out of kindness, but out of necessity. Enslaved people can only be pushed so far before they become genuinely unable to work. You're given water, ladled from a barrel. It's warm and tastes faintly of the wooden barrel, but it's the most delicious thing you've ever tasted. You drink greedily, feeling it run down your throat, feeling your body absorb it desperately. You're given a small amount of food, the same corn mush from breakfast, maybe with a piece of salt pork if there's any available. You eat quickly, mechanically, fuel for a body that's being used like a machine. You sit in the shade of that big oak tree, your back against its trunk. Around you, others are doing the same, sitting, lying down, trying to recover enough to continue. No one talks much. Everyone is too tired. You close your eyes for just a moment, and it would be so easy to fall asleep right here, to let consciousness slip away. But you can't. The break is 15 minutes. Not nearly enough, but more than you feared you'd get. Then it's back to the fields, back to cutting and bundling and carrying. The afternoon is somehow worse than the morning, despite the sun starting its descent. Your body is already depleted, already pushed beyond what should be reasonable limits. Every movement takes conscious effort now. Your hands shake as you grip the knife. Your legs tremble as you hoist another bundle. But you keep going because stopping isn't an option. You keep going because this is what survival looks like. Putting one foot in front of the other, making one more cut, carrying one more load, enduring one more hour. As evening finally approaches, the pace doesn't slacken. If anything, it intensifies. The plants must all be cut today while they're at peak quality. Every hour of delay means degraded dye quality, means lost profit, and lost profit means someone's anger will be directed at you. So you push through the pain, through the exhaustion, through the voice in your head that's begging you to stop. The sun is setting. When you finally carry your last bundle to the vats, the sky is streaked with orange and purple, beautiful colors that you're too tired to appreciate. You drop the bundle and nearly fall yourself, catching your balance at the last moment. Your whole body is shaking. Your hands are bloody and blistered. Your shoulders feel like they might never work properly again. You're more tired than you knew a person could be and still remain conscious. But there's no rest yet, because now comes the next phase. Now comes the vats, where the indigo plants you've just harvested will be transformed into dye. And that process is somehow even harder than what you've already endured. Asterisk, the vats, where blue is born. Asterisk, The vats stand in a row behind one of the plantation outbuildings, positioned where they can receive water from the creek through a series of ditches and sluices. They're rough wooden structures built from thick cypress planks that have been sealed with pitch to make them watertight. Each vat is about 12 feet long, 6 feet wide, and 4 feet deep, large enough to process significant quantities of plant material. Large enough that you could drown in one if you fell in during the fermentation process. The thought has occurred to you more than once, though whether it comes as a fear or something else, you try not to examine too closely. There are 3 vats in sequence, each serving a specific purpose in the transformation of green plants into blue dye. The process is called a 3-vat system, though the people who write about it in ledgers and letters don't understand it the way you do. They know the mechanical steps, the timing, the approximate temperatures, but you know it in your body, in your senses, in the accumulated wisdom that was passed to you from people who learned it from their parents and grandparents, stretching back through generations to West African communities where indigo was processed long before any set foot in Carolina. The first vat is called the steeper, and it's where the harvested plants begin their transformation. The bundles you spent all day cutting and carrying are now being loaded into this vat, piled high until the wooden container is nearly full of green plant matter. Others are helping with this work. It's too important, too time-sensitive to do slowly. The plants must be submerged quickly before they dry out, before the chemical compounds in their leaves begin to break down in ways that won't serve the process. Once the steeper is packed with plants, water is added. The creek water flows through the sluices, filling the vat until the indigo is completely submerged. Wooden beams are then laid across the top and weighted down with stones to keep the plant material from floating. Everything must stay underwater. Everything must stay in contact with the liquid that will become, in time, the basis of the dye, and then the fermentation begins. This is where the process becomes visceral in ways that are hard to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it. The smell starts within hours, a sour, rotting odor that makes your eyes water and your stomach turn. It's the smell of decomposition, of plant matter breaking down, of bacteria working on the submerged leaves and stems. The smell gets into your clothes, your hair, your skin. It follows you back to your quarters at night, invades your dreams, becomes so omnipresent that you sometimes wonder if you'll ever smell anything else again. The fermentation continues for 10 to 14 hours, depending on the temperature. Warmer weather speeds the process. Cooler weather slows it. Someone must check the vat regularly, and that someone is often you. You approach the steeper and look down at the surface of the water, which has turned a murky greenish brown. You can see bubbles rising as the fermentation releases gases. The smell is overwhelming up close, so strong that you have to breathe through your mouth to keep from gagging. Even then, you can taste it, a bitter, rotten flavor that coats your tongue. You're watching for a specific change. The water starts to develop an iridescent sheen, a slight oily quality on its surface. When you see this, when you see the first hints of that copper-colored scum forming, you know the fermentation is approaching completion. Timing is critical. Ferment too little, and you won't extract enough indican from the plants. Ferment too long, and the chemical process will continue past the useful stage, degrading the compounds you need. The decision of when to stop the fermentation is based on experience, on knowledge that can't be written in books or reduced to simple rules. You know when it's right because your grandfather knew, because his mother knew, because this knowledge traveled across an ocean in the minds of enslaved people who became the unwilling keepers of technical expertise. When the moment is right, you're the one who makes this determination. Regardless of what the foreman might think, the liquid must be drained from the steeper into the second vat, called the beater. This is done by opening a wooden plug at the bottom of the steeper, letting the liquid flow through a channel into the next vat, while the spent plant matter remains behind. The liquid that drains out is yellow-green, cloudy, and still smells terrible. It doesn't look like it contains anything valuable. But appearances deceive. Dissolved in this liquid is indican, the precursor compound, waiting to be transformed. The beating process is where the real magic happens. Though magic is perhaps the wrong word for something so physically demanding, the liquid in the beater must be agitated violently to introduce oxygen. Oxygen is what triggers the chemical transformation, converting indican into indigo pigment. And the agitation must be thorough, consistent, and prolonged. This means manual beating using wooden paddles to churn the liquid, creating splashes and foam and waves within the vat. You take your position at the beater alongside several other workers. Each of you has a paddle, a flat piece of wood attached to a long handle. You plunge it into the liquid and begin the rhythmic motion down, up, stirring and beating and churning. The liquid splashes up, getting on your arms, your face, your clothes. It burns slightly when it touches your skin, the alkaline mixture irritating any small cuts or scrapes you already have. Your eyes water not just from the smell, but from the droplets that inevitably land on your face. The beating must continue for at least 30 minutes, sometimes longer. Your arms begin to ache within the first few minutes, a burning sensation in your shoulders and biceps. But you can't slow down, can't ease up. The violence of the agitation matters. Insufficient beating means incomplete transformation, means lost dye, means someone's profit margin affected. So you beat harder, throwing your whole body into the motion, creating as much turbulence as possible. As you work, you begin to see the transformation. The yellow-green liquid starts to change, taking on a blue tinge. The change is gradual at first, almost imperceptible, but it builds. The blue deepens, intensifies. Foam forms on the surface, and this foam is blue, not the rich indigo blue of the final product, but a lighter, almost turquoise shade. It's extraordinary, really, to witness this metamorphosis, to see something that looked worthless transform into something valuable, to understand that you're not just watching a chemical reaction, but participating in an ancient process, applying knowledge that predates this plantation, this colony, this entire forced diaspora. The foreman watches intently. Though he doesn't understand what he's seeing as deeply as you do, he knows the process works, knows that beating produces blue, but he doesn't know why, doesn't understand that you're essentially forcing oxygen into solution, creating the conditions for oxidation, allowing molecular transformations to occur. This knowledge isn't in his head, it's in yours, inherited and learned and earned through experience. Yet another form of expertise that will never be credited to you, never compensated, never even acknowledged. Your arms are trembling now, the muscles screaming for rest. Sweat pours down your face despite the evening coolness. The smell of the fermented liquid is making you dizzy. But you keep beating, keep churning, keep forcing oxygen into the mixture. Around you, others are doing the same, and together you create a kind of brutal choreographicals, rising and falling, liquid splashing, bodies moving in synchronization born of necessity rather than design. Finally, the color reaches its peak. The liquid is now definitively blue, and the foam on top has changed from pale turquoise to something deeper. This is the moment. You stop beating, your arms dropping almost involuntarily, muscles quivering with fatigue. The liquid in the vat settles, and you can see particles beginning to precipitate out, tiny flecks of blue sinking slowly toward the bottom. This is the indigo pigment, solid indigo blue, separating from the liquid. Now that the chemical transformation is complete, the beater must now sit undisturbed for several hours, allowing all the pigment to settle. This is one of the few pauses in the process, a moment when there's nothing to do but wait. You step away from the vat, your clothes soaked with a mixture of sweat and indigo liquid. Your arms hang at your sides, too tired to lift. Your hands are cramping, fingers locked into the shape of gripping the paddle. You flex them slowly, painfully, trying to restore circulation and flexibility. But the work isn't done. Once the pigment has settled, the clear liquid on top, now called the cutting water, must be carefully drained off. This is done through another plug near the bottom of the beater, positioned above the layer of settled pigment. The draining must be done carefully, slowly, to avoid disturbing the precious blue sludge at the bottom. You've seen people drain too quickly and lose significant amounts of pigment in the wastewater. The foreman becomes violent when this happens. So you drain carefully, watching the level drop, stopping when you can see you're approaching the pigment layer. What remains at the bottom of the beater is transferred to the third vat, called the settler. This is done by scooping the blue sludge with buckets and carrying it to the settler vat. The sludge is thick, almost paste-like, heavy with pigment. It stains your hands an immediate, deep blue. This staining will last for days, sometimes weeks, marking you as someone who works with indigo. Your fingernails, the creases in your palms, the skin around your cuticles all turn blue. It's indelible, inescapable, a visible sign of your labor in the settler vat. The indigo paste is allowed to dry somewhat, though it won't fully dry here. Later, it will be strained through cloth bags, pressed to remove excess water, and formed into cakes or balls for shipment. But that's work for tomorrow or the next day. For now, the immediate crisis of processing today's harvest is complete. You look down at your hands, blue and raw and blistered. You look at the vats, at the indigo sludge that represents hours of brutal labor. You think about the fact that this blue, this extraordinary, beautiful, valuable blue will be shipped across the ocean, will be bought by dye houses in London or textile manufacturers in the English countryside, will color fine fabrics that will be made into clothing for wealthy people who will never know and never care about the conditions under which it was produced, will never know your name, your story, the fact that you even exist. The blue is born from your suffering, born from knowledge that was stolen along with your ancestors' freedom, born from a process that burns your skin and breaks your body and fills your lungs with fumes that probably shorten your life. And yet, it's beautiful. That's the terrible paradox. You live with this thing you help create is genuinely beautiful, genuinely valuable, genuinely remarkable from a technical standpoint. But the beauty is poisoned by the circumstances of its creation. The foreman is satisfied with today's batch. He makes notes in his ledger, calculating the approximate yield, the quality of the pigment. These numbers will be reported to the plantation owner, will influence decisions about next year's planting, will determine the plantation's profitability. You are part of this calculation only as a unit of labor, a factor in the production equation. Your skill, your knowledge, your sheer physical effort all reduced to a line in a ledger, a contribution to someone else's wealth. You walk away from the vats as darkness fully settles. Your whole body aches. The smell of fermented indigo clings to you. Your blue-stained hands hang at your sides. Tomorrow there will be more work the fields. Don't stop needing attention just because harvest happened. But tonight, for just a few hours, you'll try to rest. Try to find whatever small moments of peace are available to you. Try to remember that you're more than just a tool for indigo production, more than just property, more than just the blue stains on your hands. The vats stand silent now, waiting for the next harvest. The blue has been born, and you've survived another day of giving birth to it. Community in the margins * evening comes as a gradual softening, the fierce heat of the day releasing its grip degree by subtle degree. The sun sinks toward the horizon, painting the sky with colors that would be beautiful if you had the energy left to notice them properly, and pinks and purples that seem almost apologetic after the sun's brutal intensity throughout the day. You make your way back to the quarters, your body moving on autopilot, muscle memory carrying you along the familiar path because conscious thought requires more energy than you currently possess. The quarters are a collection of small wooden cabins arranged in rough rows, similar in construction, but each with its own small variations. A patch on the roof where someone repaired it, a stone placed as a step near a door, small marks of human habitation despite the structure's uniform simplicity. Smoke rises from a few of the cabins where people have managed to start cooking fires. The smell of wood smoke mingles with other sense-washed bodies. The persistent odor of indigo that clings to everyone who works the vats. Something being cooked that might be beans or might be greens. You're too tired to identify it precisely. You pause at the communal water barrel, using a gourd to ladle water over your hands and face. The water is warm from sitting in the sun all day, but it still feels good, washing away some of the day's grime, though nothing will remove the blue stains. You cup your hands and drink deeply, your body still desperate for hydration after the day's losses to sweat. The water tastes of wood and minerals, nothing like the clean well water you remember from childhood, from before. But it's wet, and that's what matters. Inside your cabin, others are already gathering. There's Mary, who's probably in her late 40s, though she looks older, her face weathered by years under the Carolina sun. There's Samuel, younger than you, maybe 19 or 20, tall and lean, with clever hands that can fix almost anything. There's old Thomas, that's what everyone calls him, though you don't actually know his age, who moves slowly these days, his back permanently bent from decades of field work, but whose mind is sharp and whose memory stretches back farther than anyone else's. There's Grace, who works in the big house kitchen, which means she sometimes has access to information the rest of you don't. Whispered conversations she overhears, news from the wider world that filters through the plantation owner's correspondence and dinner table discussions. You exchange nods, small gestures of acknowledgement. No one asks how your day was. Everyone knows how everyone's day was. The work is different in specifics, but identical in essence. Exhausting, dehumanizing, endless. But there's comfort in this shared understanding, in not having to explain or justify or describe. You're simply seen, your experience recognized without words. Someone has managed to cook a pot of something. You can see it sitting over the small fire pit in the center of the cabin. It looks like rice with some greens mixed in. Maybe a small piece of salt pork for flavoring. Not much, but more than nothing. Food is always scarce. The rations provided by the plantation never quite sufficient. Supplemented when possible by whatever can be grown in the small garden plots allowed near the quarters, or fish caught in the creek during rare free moments, or wild plants gathered from the edges of the forest. You accept a portion served in a wooden bowl that's been worn smooth by countless washings. The food is simple, but it tastes extraordinary after the day's exertions. You eat slowly, letting each bite settle, feeling your body begin the process of recovering from the day's abuse. Around you, others are eating too, the cabin filling with the small sounds of people satisfying hunger, the scrape of wooden spoons against bowls, the quiet chewing, an occasional sigh of satisfaction as the meal winds down. The evening's true purpose begins to emerge. This is the time when community happens, when the humanity that's systematically denied during working hours reasserts itself in small but crucial ways. This is when you're not just labor units, not just property, but people with stories and songs and memories and hopes. Old Thomas begins speaking, his voice rough but steady. He's telling a story. One you've heard before, but that never gets old. A folktale about a clever rabbit who outsmarts a fox. The story comes from Africa, carried across the ocean in the memories of people who were stolen from their homes, adapted and preserved through oral tradition. Everyone knows how it ends, but that doesn't matter. The story isn't just about the rabbit and the fox. It's about survival through cleverness, about the weak finding ways to outwit the powerful, about maintaining cultural memory in a place designed to erase it. As Thomas talks, his hands move, illustrating the action, his voice rising and falling with the story's rhythm. Children who've been released from their own work lighter than adult labor, but still labor, still exploitation, gather close to listen. Their eyes are wide, capturing something essential in this moment, proof that there's more to life than work, that stories exist, that imagination survives. Even here, when Thomas finishes, there's a moment of satisfied quiet. Then Mary begins to hum, a melody that you recognize immediately because it's been part of your life for as long as you can remember. Others join in, voices blending in harmony that requires no discussion, no arrangement. This is music that lives in collective memory, songs that serve multiple purposes. To the plantation owners and overseers, if they happen to hear, these are just work songs, spirituals, harmless expressions of religious feeling. But the songs carry other meanings, coded messages that speak to longing for freedom, to the North Star and rivers that lead to liberation, to resistance and endurance, and the fundamental refusal to be entirely broken. You add your voice to the singing, feeling something in your chest loosen slightly. The harmonies wrap around you like an embrace, connecting you to everyone else in this space, connecting you to ancestors who sang these same songs or different songs with the same purpose. Music is one of the few things that can't be taken away, can't be controlled, can't be commodified. Your voice is yours, and when you sing, you're asserting a kind of ownership over your own expression that's denied in every other aspect of your existence. Samuel has pulled out a small piece of wood he's been carving during stolen moments. It's gradually taking the shape of a bird, each feather carefully incised with a knife he's somehow managed to keep hidden from the overseers. He works on it now, shaving thin curls of wood that fall to the floor like tiny prayers. Creating something beautiful serves no practical purpose. Here the bird won't increase crop yields, won't make anyone's work easier. But that's precisely why it matters. It's an act of creation for its own sake, an assertion that beauty and craftsmanship and artistic expression haven't been completely stamped out. Grace begins to speak quietly about what she heard in the big house today. The plantation owner's brother visited, bringing news from Charleston. There's talk of a ship that was intercepted trying to reach Spanish Florida, carrying enslaved people who were running away. Her voice is neutral, careful. The walls here might be thin, and you never know who might be listening. But everyone understands the subtext. The running away happens. People attempt escape despite the brutal consequences of being caught. And sometimes they succeed. This information passes into the collective knowledge, becomes part of the mental map everyone maintains where the patrols are most active, which routes are being watched, what times of year might offer better chances. No one speaks explicitly about escape plans, but the information is there, available, tucked into memory against the possibility that someone might need it someday. The conversation shifts to lighter matters. Someone mentions seeing a fox near the chicken coops, and this sparks a discussion about whether someone should try to trap it or if the chickens are well enough protected. Someone else talks about the garden plot, about how the okra is finally producing despite the poor soil. These mundane, domestic details might seem trivial, but they're not. They're evidence of life continuing, of people making decisions and solving problems and caring about outcomes that extend beyond the immediate demands of forced labor. A young woman named Ruth is expecting a baby. You can see the swell of her belly under her dress, can see the way she moves more carefully now. Mary has appointed herself as Ruth's protector, making sure she gets extra food when possible, checking on her throughout the day, preparing for the birth that will come in a few months. There's complexity in everyone's feelings about this pregnancy. A baby means another soul born into slavery, another child who will grow up knowing only this life. But a baby also means continuity, means hope, means the community extending into the future. Ruth catches your eye and smiles, tired but genuine, and you smile back, offering what support you can through that simple exchange. The children are playing now, their voices rising in laughter as they chase each other around the cabin. They're loud, energetic, despite having worked earlier in the day at tasks deemed appropriate for their size, carrying water, picking worms off crops, running errands. Their resilience is remarkable and heartbreaking simultaneously. They don't yet fully understand the system they're trapped in, still have moments of pure childish joy that haven't been completely crushed by the weight of their circumstances. You watch them and feel a complicated mixture of emotion, grief, determination that they'll at least have these moments of play, these hours where they can be children. Old Thomas begins another story, this one not a folk tale, but a memory. He talks about when he was young, about the place he came from, though the details have grown hazy over the decades. He speaks of markets where cloth was sold in colors you can barely imagine, of festivals with drumming that lasted for days, of a sister he had who could sing so beautifully that people would stop their work just to listen. His voice cracks slightly as he speaks, and everyone listens with respectful attention. These memories are precious, fragments of a world that's been lost but not entirely forgotten, passed on through telling and retelling until they become part of the collective heritage of everyone in this cabin. Someone produces a deck of playing cards, worn and soft from use, and a small group gathers to play. The stakes are meaningless. No one has money or anything of real value to wager, but the game provides entertainment, friendly competition, a chance to laugh when someone makes a particularly bad play or celebrates a winning hand. The cards themselves are a small act of defiance. Enslaved people aren't supposed to have leisure activities, aren't supposed to own things that serve no productive purpose. But these cards exist anyway, hidden when necessary, brought out during these precious evening hours. You participate in all of this peripherally, too tired to be fully engaged, but drawing sustenance from simply being present. The blue stains on your hands are visible in the firelight, a reminder of today's work that you'll carry for days to come. But here, in this space, you're more than those stains. You're someone who has a name, a history, relationships, preferences, thoughts, feelings. You're not just a unit of labor, but a member of a community that shouldn't exist according to the logic of slavery, but does exist anyway, stubbornly, persistently, necessarily. As full darkness settles outside, people begin to drift toward sleep. The workday starts early tomorrow. It always starts early, and rest is a precious commodity. You make your way to your sleeping spot, that thin mattress that barely deserves the name. Your body aches in so many places that you've almost stopped noticing specific pains. They've merged into one general soreness that you've learned to carry. But as you settle into position, as you feel sleep beginning to pull you under, you hold on to something from this evening. The sound of laughter, the taste of food shared among friends, the feeling of voices joined in song, the sight of a carved bird taking shape, the knowledge that tomorrow evening, if you survive tomorrow's labor, there will be another gathering, another meal, another opportunity to be fully human in these margins between exploitation. This is how resistance works sometimes, not through dramatic gestures or violent uprisings, though those happen too, but through the stubborn maintenance of community, culture, identity, through refusing to be reduced entirely to your economic function, through insisting on your humanity hour by stolen hour, gathering by gathering, song by song. The day has been brutal. Tomorrow will be brutal. But tonight, for these few hours, you existed as more than property. Tonight, you were part of something that slavery cannot entirely destroy. no matter how hard it tries. And that, in its own way, is a kind of victory. The risks and resistances, there's a particular kind of courage that doesn't announce itself, doesn't dramatic gestures or declarations. It's the courage of small refusals, of calculated risks, of surviving in ways that preserve some kernel of self-determination, even within a system designed to eliminate it entirely. This courage exists in every moment of every day on the plantation, though it's rarely recognized as such by anyone outside the community that practices it. You've learned to recognize resistance in its many forms. Sometimes it's as simple as Samuel accidentally breaking his hoe, requiring repair time that takes him out of the fields for an hour. Is it truly an accident? Probably not. The tool just happened to strike a root at precisely the right angle to snap the handle-an angle that someone with Samuel's skill and experience would normally avoid. But proving intentionality is impossible. So he gets his hour in the shade while someone else finds him a replacement tool. The foreman suspects, of course. He's not stupid. But suspicion without proof means the system has to accommodate the delay, has to absorb the small inefficiency, or consider the way Mary moves through her work in the fields. She never stops completely, never gives anyone cause to punish her for laziness. But she's also never the fastest worker. She's perfected the art of the sustainable pace working steadily, enough to avoid attention, but slowly enough to conserve energy, to keep something in reserve for tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. This is a kind of resistance to a refusal to give absolutely everything, to burn herself out completely in service of someone else's profit. Multiply Mary's approach across dozens of workers, and the plantation's productivity is measurably reduced, though in ways that are nearly impossible to quantify or address. Food goes missing from the storehouse with suspicious regularity. Not enough to trigger a major investigation, but enough that the inventory never quite matches the records. The locks are adequate. The building is supposedly secure. Yet somehow sweet potatoes disappear, cornmeal gets redistributed. Occasionally a piece of salt pork finds its way to the quarters. This represents a complex network of resistance. Someone working in or near the storehouse takes calculated risks, times their movements carefully, perhaps has an arrangement with whoever maintains the inventory records. The stolen food supplements, inadequate rations, keeps people slightly less desperate, slightly more able to endure. The sharing of information is itself an act of resistance. Grace's reports from the big house, passed on in quiet voices during evening gatherings, help everyone understand the economic and political context they're operating in. When she mentions that indigo prices have dropped in London, everyone understands that this might mean harsher conditions as the plantation owner tries to maintain profit margins by extracting more productivity from his enslaved labor force. When she reports news of slave rebellions in other colonies, carefully worded to avoid explicit discussion but clear enough in implication, people file that information away. Knowledge is power, even for those who have almost no power. Knowing what's happening beyond the plantation boundaries, understanding the larger systems you're trapped in, being aware of possibilities, however distant, these things matter. Then there are the whispered conversations about running away. These happen rarely, always in carefully chosen moments when there's minimal chance of being overheard. Someone mentions seeing patrol activity concentrated in one area, implying that another route might be less watched. Someone else talks about hearing that Spanish Florida offers sanctuary to escaped enslaved people, that the Spanish authorities will grant freedom to those who successfully reach their territory. These conversations are dangerous. Being caught discussing escape can result in brutal punishment, but they happen anyway, because the dream of freedom, however unlikely its realization, cannot be entirely suppressed. You know about the Underground Railroad, though that's not what it's called in these hushed discussions. You know there are people, both black and white, who oppose slavery and sometimes help those who are running away. You know about Harriet Tubman, though the stories about her have taken on almost mythic qualities, passed from plantation to plantation through networks of communication that slave owners don't fully understand or can't effectively monitor. The details might be exaggerated, but the core truth remains. Some people escape. Some people make it north. Freedom is possible, even if it's difficult and dangerous, and most who attempt it are caught. The Stono Rebellion happened in 1739, not so many years ago that people have forgotten. September 20th, a Sunday morning, about 20 enslaved people gathered near the Stono River, not far from Charleston. They broke into a store, armed themselves, and began marching toward Spanish Florida, gathering more people as they went, killing slave owners who tried to stop them, burning plantations, calling out for liberty. The rebellion was suppressed brutally within a day. The militia caught up with the group, killed most of them, decapitated the leaders, and displayed their heads on poles as a warning. In the aftermath, the colony passed even harsher slave codes, restricting movement and gatherings, making it illegal to teach enslaved people to read, instituting harsher punishments for any perceived resistance. But here's what the authorities couldn't: suppress the memory of the rebellion, the proof that resistance was possible, that enslaved people would fight for freedom even knowing the consequences. The story of Stono circulates in the quarters, told and retold, different versions emphasizing different details, but all carrying the same essential message. They tried, they fought, they refused to accept their bondage passively. Most died, yes, but for a brief time they were free, they were armed, they were taking control of their own destinies. This knowledge is both inspiring and cautioning. It reminds everyone that resistance is possible, but also that the consequences are severe. The reality is that armed rebellion is incredibly dangerous, requires circumstances and opportunities that rarely align, usually ends in death or worse. But the fact that it has happened, that it could happen again, changes the psychological dynamic. Slave owners live with low-level fear, understanding that the people they've enslaved outnumber them, could overwhelm them if circumstances aligned. This fear leads to the harsh punishments, the constant surveillance, the elaborate legal structures designed to prevent collective action. For you, for most people, you know, resistance takes forms less dramatic, but no less meaningful. It's the cultivation of a small garden plot where you grow vegetables that belong to you, however tenuously, that supplement your diet and assert your capacity for independent production. It's the preservation of African cultural practices, the way you prepare certain foods, the patterns you use when you have access to fabric and thread, the stories you tell, the spiritual beliefs you maintain despite pressure to adopt Christianity as your captors practice it. It's teaching children to read, secretly and dangerously, passing on literacy skills that open doors to broader understanding, even as laws explicitly forbid such education. It's also in the small sabotages that make the plantation slightly less efficient. Tools that wear out faster than they should because they're not being maintained with care. Animals that sicken mysteriously because they're not being tended as diligently as possible. Work that takes just a bit longer than it should because people are being careful to pace themselves, rather than pushing for maximum speed. These actions are almost impossible to punish because they're hard to distinguish from simple incompetence or genuine accidents. But collectively, across many workers and many days, they represent a meaningful reduction in the plantation's productivity, a small way of ensuring that slave owners don't extract absolutely every possible bit of value from their enslaved workers. There's also resistance in the maintenance of family bonds, despite the system's attempt to treat you as interchangeable units of labor. Ruth's pregnancy, Mary's protection of her, the community's investment in ensuring that baby will be born into a network of care. These are acts of resistance against commodification. The plantation owner sees Ruth as property whose value will increase when she produces another piece of property. But Ruth sees herself as a mother, sees her child as a person who will need love and protection and connection. The gap between these perspectives is where humanity survives despite oppression. Spiritual resistance matters too. The Christianity practiced in the quarters is different from what's preached in the white churches. The spirituals you sing emphasize Moses leading his people out of bondage, emphasize rivers that represent both baptism and routes to freedom, emphasize a God who sees suffering and will ultimately deliver justice. This is a theology of liberation, even when it's not explicitly stated as such. The same Bible that's used to justify slavery passages about servants obeying masters, about earthly hierarchies reflecting divine order, is reinterpreted to emphasize freedom, dignity, the fundamental equality of all souls before God. This interpretation keeps hope alive, keeps the promise of eventual liberation present, even when material circumstances offer little reason for hope. Some people practice older spiritual traditions alongside or instead of Christianity. There are those who maintain African religious practices, adapted to new circumstances, but recognizable in their essential elements. Ancestor veneration, herbal medicine that draws on traditional knowledge, divination practices, protective rituals, these survive despite efforts to suppress them, passed down quietly, practiced in secret, providing psychological and spiritual resources for survival. You think sometimes about your own relationship to resistance. You're not a rebel leader, not someone who will organize an uprising or make a dramatic escape attempt. You're too aware of the consequences, too responsible to the people who depend on you, too exhausted by daily survival to take on additional risks. But you resist in your own ways. You resist by maintaining your sense of self, by refusing to internalize the dehumanization that surrounds you. You resist by caring about your work with the indigo plants, even though the profits go elsewhere. Because the expertise you hold is yours and represents knowledge that connects you to ancestors and traditions that predate this plantation. You resist by participating in community, by singing, by laughing when there's something to laugh about, by finding small joys in a joyless situation. You resist by surviving. This might sound like capitulation, continuing to work, continuing to endure rather than fighting back dramatically. But survival itself is a form of resistance when a system is designed to work people to death and then replace them. Every day you survive is a day you haven't been broken, haven't been used up and discarded. Every day you maintain your humanity, preserve your connections, pass on knowledge to younger people. These are victories against a system that wants to reduce you to nothing more than a tool. The risks are ever present. You've seen people whipped for infractions, real and imagined. You've seen people sold away from their families, loaded onto wagons, and taken elsewhere, their screams of protest fading as distance swallows them. You've seen people worked past their endurance, collapsing in fields, sometimes recovering and sometimes not. The punishment for attempting escape is particularly brutal if you're caught. You might be whipped until the flesh hangs from your back, might have an Achilles tendon cut to prevent further running, might be sold to the worst plantations in the deep south where conditions are even harsher. The punishment isn't just physical, but is designed as spectacle, as warning to everyone else. This is what happens when you try to be free, yet people keep trying, keep resisting in ways large and small, keep refusing to accept that this condition is permanent or natural or acceptable. The human spirit's refusal to be entirely crushed. This is what resistance ultimately comes down to. It's not always heroic. It's often survival mixed with small refusals, mixed with strategic compromises. It's picking your battles, knowing when to bow and when to stand firm, maintaining what you can of dignity and autonomy within impossible constraints. As evening darkness deepens and the quarter settles into sleep, you think about these things, about courage and risk and resistance and survival, about the people who've run and those who've been caught and those who've somehow made it, about the small rebellions of daily life and the larger rebellions that erupt occasionally throughout the colonies, about what it means to resist when the odds are overwhelmingly against you, when the system has all the power and you have almost none, and you think about tomorrow, about waking before dawn and going to the fields and tending the indigo that will make someone else wealthy, about doing your work well because you have pride in your expertise, but not so well that you give absolutely everything, about finding moments to breathe, to connect, to remember that you're human despite everything insisting otherwise, about surviving another day and helping others survive too, because that's what community means, what resistance means when dramatic gestures aren't possible or practical. The courage to continue, that's what you carry into sleep. Not the courage of heroes in stories, but the courage of ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, doing what they must to survive and preserve some fragment of self-determination. Tomorrow will require the same courage, and the day after, and all the days that stretch ahead until something changes, somehow, someday. Until then, you resist by persisting, by refusing to be entirely broken, by maintaining the small spaces of humanity that oppression can't quite eliminate. That's the truth they don't understand. The slave owners and overseers and everyone who benefits from this system, they can own your labor, can control your movements, can punish your body, but they can't own your mind, your spirit, your fundamental self. those remain yours, defended daily through small acts of resistance that add up to something larger, the refusal to disappear entirely into the role they've assigned you. You sleep, finally, and dream of freedom in whatever form your exhausted mind can imagine it. The economy of blue. The indigo leaves the plantation in wooden barrels, each one stamped with the plantation owner's Mark III interlocking letters that serve as a brand, a claim of ownership not just over the dye inside, but over all the labor that produced it. The barrels are loaded onto carts that will carry them to Charleston, South Carolina's main port city, where they'll be inspected, evaluated for quality, and loaded onto ships bound for England. This journey from field to fashion represents one thread in a vast web of global commerce, a web built largely on enslaved labor and stretching across oceans to connect continents in relationships of profound inequality. You'll never see where the indigo goes, never witness the next stages of its transformation, but you've heard enough from Grace's reports, from conversations overheard when plantation owners visit each other, from the fragments of information that filter down to the quarters, to piece together a general understanding of the system you're embedded in. And understanding it matters, even if you can't change it, because seeing the full picture reveals the true scope of the injustice, not just what's taken from you personally, but how that theft feeds into larger patterns of extraction and exploitation. The indigo you produced through months of cultivation and hours of brutal processing will be sold to British merchants who specialize in dye stuffs. These merchants have established networks connecting colonial producers with European textile manufacturers. The price fluctuates based on quality and market demand, but good Carolina indigo commands premium rates compared to indigo from some other sources. The plantation owner will receive payment in British pounds, a significant sum that represents profit after deducting production costs, costs that include the price paid for enslaved workers. You're listed as an asset on his balance sheet, purchased years ago for a specific amount that has long since been recouped through your labor, basic maintenance expenses, supplies, and land taxes. From Charleston, the indigo travels across the Atlantic in the holds of merchant ships, packed alongside other colonial exports, also produced largely by enslaved labor in the Low Country. Naval stores like tar and pitch, timber, deerskins. The voyage takes 6 to 8 weeks, depending on weather and winds. The barrels of indigo swaying in darkness below decks, while above them sailors work the ropes and sails, while passengers, if there are any, pace the decks, while dolphins occasionally surface beside the bow and the endless horizon circles around the ship. The indigo knows nothing of this journey, is simply cargo being moved from one market to another. Its value recognized, but its origins increasingly abstracted with each mile traveled in England. The indigo is purchased by textile manufacturers, particularly those producing woolen cloth. Britain's textile industry is in the process of transformation. New machines are being developed. Factory systems are beginning to replace traditional cottage industry. Demand for cloth is growing both domestically and for export. Blue dye is essential to this industry. Undyed cloth is practical but plain. Colored cloth, especially in rich, permanent colors like indigo blue, commands higher prices and appeals to consumers with purchasing power. the dyeing process in English. Textile mills involves skilled workers who understand the chemistry of color, who know how to prepare fabric to receive dye, how to manage dye baths at proper temperatures, how to achieve even color penetration, how to fix the color so it won't fade with washing or sun exposure. These workers are paid wages, often low wages, often in conditions that would horrify modern observers, but wages nonetheless. They're free to leave their employment, free to seek better opportunities, free in ways that you are not. The irony sits bitter on your tongue when you think about it. Your unpaid labor produced the dye that enables their paid labor, and the profit from both flows upward to owners and investors. The dyed cloth is then made into garments, into upholstery, into any of the thousands of uses for fabric that wealthy consumers demand. A woman in London might wear a blue dress whose color came from indigo you processed, never knowing and never thinking about the chain of labor that produced it. A gentleman might have blue waistcoats or breeches, might take pride in his fashionable appearance, might display his wealth through his clothing choices, completely unaware that the blue he's wearing represents someone's blood, sweat, blistered hands, and stolen life. This is how the system works. Labor is extracted from you without compensation. The products of that labor are sold for profit. Those profits are used to purchase more land and more enslaved people, creating a cycle that enriches a small number of people while impoverishing and oppressing vastly larger numbers. The plantation owner's wealth grows with each harvest. He builds a larger house, purchases finer furniture, sends his sons to be educated in England, arranges advantageous marriages for his daughters, establishes himself as a gentleman of consequence in colonial society. All of this built on your backs, on your hands, on your exhaustion and pain and stolen freedom. But the plantation is just one node in a much larger network. The British merchants who buy the indigo profit from the markup between what they pay colonial producers and what they charge textile manufacturers. The ship owners and sailors profit from transporting the goods. The textile manufacturers profit from converting raw indigo into dyed cloth. The garment makers profit from turning cloth. The retailers profit from selling finished goods to consumers. At every stage, value is added and captured by those who control capital, while those who perform actual labor receive only a fraction of the value they create. Enslaved workers like you receive nothing at all except the bare minimum required to keep you alive and working. The economic logic is straightforward. Indigo is valuable because blue dye is scarce and demand is high. Carolina is ideal for indigo production because climate and soil conditions are favorable. Enslaved labor makes production profitable because the costs are minimized. You're forced to work without wages, given only minimal food and shelter, maintained as cheaply as possible. If workers had to be paid fair wages, if they had to be attracted and retained through decent conditions and competitive compensation, the profit margins would shrink dramatically. Slavery isn't an unfortunate side effect of indigo production. It's the economic foundation that makes the whole system work as profitably as it does. Consider the mathematics from the plantation owner's perspective, though thinking this way makes you feel slightly sick. Say he purchased you for £50 several years ago. That was a one-time capital investment. Your maintenance, costs, food, clothing, basic shelter probably amount to £5 per year, maybe £10 in generous estimates. You produce indigo that, after processing and transport costs, generates perhaps £30 in profit annually. Within 2 years, you've paid for your own purchase price. Every year after that is pure profit from his perspective, minus the minimal maintenance costs. If you work for 20 years before your body gives out, you've generated £600 in profit on a £50 investment. From a purely financial standpoint, you're an extraordinarily successful investment, but you're not an investment. You're a human being. You have thoughts, feelings, dreams, relationships, dignity, inherent worth that has nothing to do with your economic productivity. The system requires treating you as property, requires reducing you to your labor value, requires ignoring your humanity in order to function without moral qualms. And this reduction isn't just personal cruelty, encoded in law, defended by religion, justified by pseudo-scientific racism, embedded in every level of society. The wealth generated by slavery flows in specific directions. It enriches plantation owners directly. It enriches the colonial government through taxes on land and exports. It enriches British merchants and manufacturers. It contributes to the prosperity of port cities like Charleston and Bristol and London. It underwrites the lifestyle of an entire class of people who've never worked in a field, who've never felt the burn of indigo on their skin, who've never known hunger or exhaustion, or the specific despair that comes from realizing your children will inherit your bondage. This wealth also builds institutions, churches where enslaved people aren't welcome or are relegated to segregated areas, universities where the sons of plantation owners study philosophy and law, never questioning the source of the money that pays their tuition. Banks that offer loans using enslaved people as collateral, that finance the purchase of more land and more people. Insurance companies that sell policies protecting slave owners against the loss of their property. Government buildings constructed with money derived from taxing slave-produced goods. The entire infrastructure of colonial society rests on a foundation of exploitation. Meanwhile, you remain poor. Not just in money, you have no money at all, but in every resource. Poor in food, in rest, in healthcare, in clothing, in shelter, in education, in opportunity. Your poverty is not accidental or incidental. It's engineered, necessary to the system. If enslaved people could accumulate resources, could gain education, could achieve any kind of independence, the entire structure would be threatened. Your poverty maintains the wealth of others. There's a particular cruelty in the distance between production and consumption. The blue dye that required months of your labor, that took a physical toll on your body, that was created through expertise you hold, this becomes a commodity that wealthy Europeans enjoy without the slightest thought about its origins. They might debate the fashion merits of different shades of blue. They might prefer indigo to woad or other blue dyes based on color fastness or depth of hue. But they don't think about you. Don't imagine the fields, the heat, the vats, the fermentation smell, the burning skin, the exhaustion. Don't picture a specific person whose hands are permanently stained blue, whose body aches constantly, whose life has been stolen to produce their fashionable clothing. This invisibility is part of how the system sustains itself. If those who benefit from slavery had to witness it directly, had to see the suffering they're causing, some of them might feel uncomfortable, might experience moral qualms. But distance creates moral insulation. The plantation owner sees you daily but has convinced himself that slavery is natural, ordained by God, beneficial even to the enslaved. The British consumers see only finished products, are so many steps removed from production that they can enjoy the benefits without confronting the human cost. It's similar to how people today consume products without thinking about the labor conditions that produced them. Distance and abstraction make exploitation tolerable to those who benefit from it. You wonder sometimes what would happen if the connection were made visible. If every piece of blue-dyed cloth carried a label, this color produced by enslaved workers in South Carolina. Their names are not recorded. Their compensation was zero. Their life expectancy is reduced by the hazardous work. But the blue is very nice. Would people still buy it? Would they care? Or would they shrug, rationalize, decide that individuals can't change systems and therefore bear no responsibility for participating in them? You'll never know the answers to these questions. The blue leaves the plantation, enters the stream of commerce, and disappears from your knowledge. Months later, Grace might report something overheard about indigo prices in London, giving you a fragmentary glimpse of where your labor ended up. But mostly, there's just absence. The plants are gone. The barrels are gone. The blue is gone. And all that remains is the staining on your hands, and the ache in your body, and the knowledge that tomorrow you'll begin the process again. The system has momentum. It's been building for over a century, has created interlocking interests among so many people and institutions that changing it seems impossible. Plantation owners depend on slavery for their wealth. Merchants depend on colonial exports. Manufacturers depend on reliable supplies of raw materials. Government revenues depend on taxes from these economic activities. Entire societies have organized themselves around the assumption that slavery is acceptable, necessary, natural. Challenging this requires confronting not just individual prejudices, but massive economic and political structures. And yet the system contains its own contradictions. The wealth it generates is real, but fragile, dependent on continued suppression of the people who actually produce it. The moral justifications grow increasingly strained as Enlightenment ideas about human rights and individual liberty gain prominence. There are already voices questioning slavery, though they're marginal and often dismissed. Quakers, some religious dissenters, occasional philosophers who take seriously the implications of their stated beliefs. About human equality, these people plant seeds of doubt that will eventually grow, but change, if it comes, will come too late for you. You'll likely live your entire life in bondage, will die without experiencing freedom, will never see justice done or receive compensation for what was stolen from you. The blue that you created will continue circulating in markets, will fade eventually from the clothes it colored, will be replaced by more blue from subsequent harvests. The plantation will continue operating, will pass from one generation of owners to the next, will keep extracting labor from people who have no choice but to give it. This is the economy of blue, a system where vibrant color is created through colorless exploitation, where beauty is born from suffering, where the value you produce flows away from you like water downhill. cooling in places you'll never reach, enriching people who will never know your name. It's efficient, profitable, and utterly unjust. And it's the world you live in, the world you navigate, the world you must survive within, while preserving whatever you can of your humanity, your dignity, your sense that you're worth more than the price listed beside your name in a plantation ledger. The blue is beautiful. You can't help but acknowledge that. The color is extraordinary, rich and deep and permanent. But you know its true cost. You've paid it with your body, your labor, your stolen life. And that knowledge changes everything, makes it impossible to see the blue as innocent or simple or merely aesthetic. It's blood money, translated into color. It's your life, transformed into someone else's luxury. It's the visible product of an invisible crime, committed daily, accepted broadly, defended vigorously by those who profit from it. The plants will grow toward their next harvest, and you'll be there, working because you must, surviving because you're stronger than they realize, resisting in small ways that add up to something larger, maintaining your humanity despite everything designed to strip it away. The economy of blue continues, and so do you. Evening and the weight of tomorrow. The darkness is almost complete now. A thin crescent moon hangs low on the horizon, providing barely enough light to make out shapes the rough outline of the cabin, the silhouettes of trees against the slightly lighter sky, the faint glow of a dying fire somewhere in the quarter. The air has cooled somewhat, though cool is relative in the low country summer. It's less oppressive than midday, but still heavy, still humid, still carrying the scent of the marshes and the indigo fields and the accumulated sweat of too many people living in too small spaces. You lie on your thin mattress, body finally still after the day's endless motion. Every part of you aches with a deep, bone-tired soreness that no single night's sleep will cure. Your hands throb the blisters from today's harvest, the permanent calluses that never fully heal, the blue stains that mark you as an indigo worker as surely as a brand. Your shoulders feel like they're carrying weight even now, even lying down. The ghost of the indigo bundles you carried still pressing against your muscles. Your back curves in the same bent position it held for hours in the fields, and straightening it completely would hurt more than this familiar curve. Around you in the darkness, you can hear others settling into sleep, the rustle of someone shifting position on their mattress, a cough quickly suppressed. Someone's breathing gradually deepening and evening out as they slide into unconsciousness. The small sounds of communal living that might be intrusive if you had any energy left to be bothered by them, but which instead are simply familiar, almost comforting in their normalcy. You're not alone in this experience. That fact doesn't make it better, exactly, but it makes it bearable. Shared suffering is still suffering, but it's suffering understood, witnessed, held by a community that knows exactly what each person has endured. Tomorrow will be another day of work. This is the thought that presses down with its own particular weight, heavier than any bundle of indigo plants. Tomorrow you'll wake in the darkness again. You'll feel this same soreness, perhaps slightly worse after a night when muscles stiffen and injuries settle deeper into tissue. You'll go to the fields again. You'll bend and cut and carry, or you'll weed and hoe and tend, depending on where you're assigned, what the season demands. The sun will rise and burn. The humidity will wrap around you like a wet blanket. The foreman will yell. The hours will stretch endlessly until they suddenly collapse into evening. And you'll find yourself back here again, exhausted again, knowing that the next day will bring the same cycle. This is perhaps the hardest part, not the physical pain, though that's real and constant, but the psychological weight of knowing it will never change. Not next week, not next month, not next year. You will work these fields until your body gives out, until you're too old or too injured to be useful, at which point you'll be given lighter duties if you're lucky, or simply left to fade away if you're not. There's no retirement from slavery, no point at which you can say you've worked enough and earned rest. There's only work until you can't work anymore. And then whatever comes after, you think about the blue you created today, now sitting in barrels waiting to be transported. Think about how it will travel to places you'll never see, will color fabrics you'll never touch, will adorn people who will never know you exist. This particular indigo carried some small piece of you with it to our labor, your expertise, your pain. But that piece will disappear into the vastness of global commerce, will be transformed and sold and used up, leaving no trace of its origins. In a few years, the clothes dyed with this indigo will fade or tear or simply go out of fashion, and they'll be discarded. And what will remain? Nothing that acknowledges your existence, your contribution, your humanity. There's an anger that lives in you, that lives in everyone here. It's not the hot, explosive anger that leads to violence. That kind of anger gets you killed or worse. It's a cold, deep anger that sits in your chest like a stone, that never entirely goes away, that shapes your perceptions and thoughts in ways you're not always conscious of. Anger at the injustice of it all. Anger at the people who benefit from your suffering. Anger at a world that allows this to continue, that treats it as normal and natural and acceptable. This anger can't be expressed directly. That would be too dangerous, but it finds outlets. It fuels the small resistances, the work slowdowns, the careful breaking of tools, the preservation of culture and community, despite all attempts to suppress them. But alongside the anger is something else, a stubborn insistence on finding meaning, on experiencing joy when possible, on maintaining connections that make life worth living despite impossible circumstances. You think about this evening's gathering, about the stories and songs and laughter that emerged even after a brutal day, about Ruth's smile when Mary fussed over her, making sure she'd eaten enough, about the carved bird taking shape in Samuel's hands, about the children playing, their voices rising in innocent delight. These moments matter. They don't compensate for the injustice, don't balance the scales, don't make everything okay, but they're real. They're yours. They're evidence that you're more than just the labor you're forced to perform. You think about your ancestors, about the people who came before you. Some you remember your mother, who died when you were young, worn out by work and grief and the accumulated weight of a life in bondage. Your father, sold away when you were a child, his face fading in your memory, despite your efforts to hold on to it. You remember them teaching you things, how to move through the world with caution, how to read situations and people, how to find small moments of beauty, even in ugliness. They gave you survival skills, not through formal instruction, but through example, through the way they navigated their own impossible situations. And you think about ancestors further back, people whose names you don't know, but whose existence you carry in your body, in your features, in the cultural memories that persist despite everything. People who lived in Africa, who knew freedom, who had their own languages and religions and ways of organizing society, who were captured or sold, who survived the Middle Passage, that journey across the Atlantic that killed so many, that traumatized all who experienced it, who arrived in the Americas and somehow, impossibly, survived the initial shock and began the work of creating new communities, new ways of being, new forms of resistance and preservation. You're here because they survived. Your existence is testament to their strength, their refusal to be entirely broken, their insistence on continuing despite everything. This legacy is both burden and gift. Burden because you carry the weight of their trauma, because you're living out the consequences of decisions and events you had no part in, because you inherited a condition you didn't choose and can't escape. But also gift because you carry their strength, their knowledge, their stubborn determination to survive and find meaning. You're part of a continuity that stretches backward and forward, that connects you to people you'll never meet but who share your essential struggle. You wonder what they would think of you, those ancestors, whether they'd be proud or disappointed, whether they'd understand the choices you make and the compromises you accept. You wonder what you would say to them if you could somehow speak across the distance of time and ocean. Probably you'd just say, "I'm still here. We're still here. You survived, so we survive. That's all. That's enough." The future is harder to think about than the past. What future is there, really, when tomorrow looks exactly like today and next year looks exactly like this year? Ruth's baby will be born in a few months, will enter the same world you inhabit, will face the same limited possibilities. The thought is almost unbearably, another generation born into bondage, another life that will be stolen from the moment of its first breath. But Ruth will love that child anyway, will teach it, protect it as much as possible, try to give it whatever small advantages can be managed. Because that's what people do. They continue. They care for the next generation. They refuse to let hopelessness have the final word. Maybe things will change. Maybe somewhere, somehow, forces are building that will eventually dismantle this system. You've heard whispers of anti-slavery sentiment in some places, of philosophical arguments against the institution of religious groups who oppose it. These seem like distant, abstract possibilities, unlikely to affect your lifetime. But maybe they'll affect Ruth's baby's lifetime, or that baby's children. Maybe the arc of history really does bend toward justice, even if the bend is so gradual that you can't see it happening from where you stand. Or maybe not. Maybe slavery will continue for generations more, will only end through catastrophic violence, or will simply evolve into new forms of exploitation that are different in specifics, but similar in their essential injustice. You can't know. The future is closed to you, hidden behind walls of uncertainty and powerlessness. All you can do is survive in the present. Make what choices are available to you. Preserve what you can of your humanity and community. Hope that somehow things might be better for those who come after. The cabin is quiet now. Everyone else seems to have fallen asleep, their breathing creating a soft rhythm that's almost soothing. You should sleep too. Your body desperately needs rest, needs to repair what it can before tomorrow's demands begin again. but your mind is still active, turning over thoughts and memories and worries in that way that happens when exhaustion meets anxiety. You think about tomorrow's specific tasks. The fields will need attention. There's always weeding, always monitoring for pests, always something that needs doing. Maybe there will be another harvest soon, if different sections of indigo have reached maturity. Maybe you'll be assigned to the vats again. We'll spend another day breathing fermentation fumes and beating the liquid until your arms scream. Whatever it is, it will be hard. It will demand more than you want to give. And you'll give it anyway because you have no choice. But here's the thing you hold on to. The small truth that makes continuing possible. They can control your labor, but they can't control your inner life. They can force you to work, but they can't force you to stop thinking, stop feeling, stop maintaining your sense of self. Your thoughts are your own. Your memories are your own. Your love for the people around you, your appreciation of small beauties, your anger at injustice, your hope for eventual freedom, these belong to you. They exist in a space that's not entirely accessible to those who claim to own you. This internal freedom is limited, obviously. It doesn't change material conditions, doesn't put food in your stomach or ease your physical pain, doesn't make the work any less exhausting, but it matters. It's what separates you from being truly reduced to property, truly made into nothing more than a tool. You're not what they say you are. You're not the value assigned to you in a ledger or the labor capacity they've calculated. You're a full human being with a rich inner life, with dignity that persists despite everything designed to strip it away. Sleep is finally pulling at you, consciousness beginning to blur and fragment. Your last thoughts before you slip under are simple, reduced to essentials. You survived today. You'll survive tomorrow. You're still here. You're still yourself. That's everything. That's enough. The darkness holds you. The weight of tomorrow waits, but for these few hours, it can wait without your attention. Your breathing slows, deepens, matches the rhythm of those sleeping around you. Your body begins the work of recovery that it does every night, healing what it can, maintaining what it must, preparing for the day that will come too soon. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird calls. The sound filters through the walls of the cabin, through the thickness of humidity, through your descending consciousness. It's a lonely sound, but also beautiful in its own way. A reminder that life continues in forms beyond human control and human suffering. The bird doesn't know about slavery or injustice or the global economy of blue. It just lives, sings, exists in the moment. Maybe that's enough of a lesson for tonight. Exist, continue, survive, maintain whatever you can of beauty and connection and humanity. Resist by persisting, and trust that your existence matters, that your story matters, even if the official histories will never record it, even if those who benefit from your labor will never acknowledge it. You are here. You matter. You are more than what was done to you, more than the circumstances that constrain you. You are the descendant of people who survived impossible things, and you are the ancestor of people who will inherit whatever future your survival helps create. In this moment, in this darkness, in this small cabin on a South Carolina plantation in the middle of the 18th century, you are fully human. That truth persists despite everything designed to deny it. And with that truth held close, you finally sleep. Tomorrow waits, but tonight is yours. The darkness is both burden and gift, burden of another day survived, gift of temporary rest before the next day begins. You accept both. You surrender to sleep. You let go. The night holds you gently. And for these few hours, that's enough.